Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Walton. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? There we go. We got the right button pressed. It is Thursday, June 15th, 2017. Back on the air live. I say live, but I don't feel live. But it is true that the show is live today. We missed you yesterday. And gee whiz, just catching the breath while dashing around, trying to make sure everything else is working and everybody has what they need. It's a busy time here, even though we're in summer vacation from school. That actually makes it, generally speaking, worse timing-wise for the show. But hey, we're okay. But hell of a day to miss yesterday, wasn't it? I can't decide how I feel about having missed yesterday on the air live. I think generally speaking it was probably a good thing. Everybody needed to digest what was going on. And it would have taken us a little while to catch up on exactly what was happening in the middle of everything. Is about really live while we would have been on the air. Yesterday, of course, the shootings at the Congressional baseball game Republican team practice, the Congressional baseball game, a long-standing tradition. The two parties fielding teams for a charity fundraiser event, or at least of late it has become a charity fundraising event. I don't know if it always was. Probably a good idea. Anyway, old news by now. I'll take a look at the Morning Digest over by Daily Kos Elections vertical over at the front page of Daily Kos. Right now up at the top has it as its headline, so we might as well jump in there. Morning Digest saying, gunman attacks GOP baseball practice badly, injuring Louisiana Representative Steve Scalise. That's true. And I guess yesterday was the wrong day to remind everybody that he used to describe himself as David Duke without the baggage, because then people would say, how dare you politicize this tragic incident, et cetera, et cetera. And, yes, we certainly, it would have been a difficult time to bring that up. But today we're fine for doing that. I think he's still actually in some considerable danger. He was pretty badly injured there, and I guess everybody will want us to hold off reminding people of things like that. But it is a weird way of describing yourself, particularly after this past election where David Duke actually played a rather significant role, if unofficial, and Donald Trump continued to disavow any connection with David Duke and his ilk, but it was pretty out there. And we all saw it, and now David Duke without the baggage, I guess, has got some baggage, although the baggage isn't the same kind he was talking about. Anyway, the incident was going to be politicized regardless. You shoot politicians, that's a political act. And it was politicized pretty quickly as well, but did watch some interesting coverage yesterday on CNN during the morning while we were waiting for the dentist appointment, etc. And Mo Brooks, I guess, was the first one to make it to the phones, and he was on for an extended period of time with CNN describing the scene. And as chaotic as you would guess, and as is the case with most mass shootings, even a brief worry about a second gunman. Once again, I remind you, usually you'll get the warning via Twitter very quickly that there very rarely is a second gunman. What we don't discuss quite as often, I think, is why we always think there's a second gunman. And the answer is because there's so many shots fired. And, of course, the reason there are so many shots fired is if you're shooting with semi-automatic weapons, it makes it that much easier to shoot that many times in a small space of time. But, there's usually more bullets flying because there's semi-automatic weapons involved, and very often with large capacity magazines. And, that's why we think there's a second shooter all the time. Then we find out, no, one person acting alone can do all of this damage quite simply, really. And actually, he wasn't even firing that quickly. I did hear some audio of the shooting event, and certainly a lot of bullets fired, a lot of them fired by police at the attacker in the end, but I don't know. Didn't sound quite as chaotic and the gunfire as heavy as described by the witnesses on the scene. No surprise there either. I mean, gunfire will do that to you, adrenaline-wise, and you'll have, like with most crimes, little to no idea of what actually happened, but you can certainly give your present sense impression, as evidence lawyers like to refer to it, of what happened there. But it usually doesn't quite match up with objective reality, insofar as that can be measured by random audio being taken by neighbors. By the way, I don't know if did you see or listen to any of this? It was a video that someone recorded on their phone, but it was being offered for its audio content as raw audio of the attack. And it's very weird. It's clear that they're neighborhood residents hearing gunshots and taking video. And by the way, we still haven't gotten to where people are able to instinctively take landscape video in an emergency. I guess the default setting for human beings in an emergency is portrait mode, and it doesn't work very well for video. But it's not your fault. Again, adrenaline can get the better of you. But these people didn't actually seem to be terribly perturbed. There was some comment during the video, just this woman, I guess, who was taking the video, asking every once in a while, who are they shooting at? But just sort of calmly, like, geez, I wonder who they're shooting at today. It's not the sort of neighborhood where there's shooting going on all the time. But I guess. But a very strange incident yesterday, and then very quickly politicized as well. By the time Rand Paul got to the phones, he had talking points, and he made sure to mention early on, before 9 o'clock in the morning, his commentary, though it was hedged, like we didn't have as he put it, a massacre, because we were protected by Capitol Police, and they were heroes, and they were. But it was interesting that before 9 a.m. he was ready to use the words massacre and killing fields and politically motivated and all that. And then the rest of the day was, all you Democrats, stop politicizing this. There's, of course, no way to not politicize a mass shooting, because for decades now we've been saying that mass shootings are a matter that could be addressed politically and through policy, and you won't do it. And easy discovery yesterday, you'll find, as I did by the end of the day, the people who say they don't want things politicized are usually the people whose politics are at fault for that thing. And they don't want it politicized because politicizing it makes clear that they're the ones who did it, or who are at fault for it, or who at least will refuse to acknowledge the role that their preferred policies and politics play in it. And that's why they don't want to politicize. If it's not politicized, if it becomes off limits to make a political point about it, then it becomes off limits to point the finger where it belongs. So maybe we'll catch up on some of our ability to do that today, with a little bit of distance in between the attacks yesterday and our reflection on it today. Greg Dworkin is here. I'm sure he'll have something to say about that, but I don't know if that's something you want to dwell on or not. But good morning, Greg.
Well, it's one of the big stories of today, so we'll definitely get to it.
Oh,
but
right.
I have to start with this. And this one I just do because of my friendship with Bill in Portland, Maine.
Yes.
And it's from the Bangor Daily News.
Oh.
And
okay.
It starts out, Hope, Maine. While jogging on a familiar overgrown wooded trail near her home on a recent warm afternoon, Rachel Borch thought to herself, what a beautiful day. Just like yesterday started, right?
Yes.
Little did she know she was about to be attacked by a rabid raccoon that she would end up killing with her bare hands.
Well.
Things happen in Maine.
They do.
And people say, oh, nothing ever happens around here. Well, stuff like that happens all the time.
Yeah. Well.
Maybe not in Portland. Portland's a city, but still.
But everybody's
Banger's a city
rabid
too.
in Portland. So.
I'm just saying, you gotta understand that the day can always start out with something that is completely in a different direction than what you expected.
Rachel.
It happens in Maine. It happened in Virginia. These things happen.
Bare hands too.
Bare hands too. Yeah.
Wow.
Well, Maine people are tough.
Yes. And they don't brook this rabies nonsense.
Well, they have to take matters into their own hands, so they did.
No truck with that. That's one of my favorite phrases. Well, I gotta find more places to say I have no truck with it.
No truck. No truck.
I don't have a truck.
Hey, it was funny you were talking about Rand Paul.
Yes, he's funny.
Let me read you this headline here. The congressman doctor who treated Scalise on the ball field.
Yeah.
It wasn't Rand Paul.
No. Although I did hear in his phone call that he was on the other side of a rather heighty fence. He was on the other side of a 20-foot fence, and getting to victims on the field meant scaling a 20-foot chain link fence while there was shooting going on.
I mean, you don't have to do it
Bad
immediately. Brad Wenstrup,
yes,
from Ohio, who was actually, I guess, a Iraqi surgeon at some point.
Yeah, better suited.
Was closer. He was better suited, absolutely better suited than Rand Paul would be.
Right.
I'm just a little surprised that Paul left the area as early as he did, but it was just interesting because Paul is a doctor.
Yes.
And I was expecting that to be part of the story. In fact, it wasn't part of the story at all.
No, I did see people mention
it may have been because of his physical location, absolutely.
Could have been, and also I guess he gets out there and he says, read the smallest line of print you can. And what happens? Nothing. I can't see anything. I've been shot. Oh.
Right. I mean, there's stories about Mo Brooks, taking his belt off and helping to use that as a tourniquet. Scalise lost a lot of blood. That's part of the reason why he's in critical condition today.
Yes. Oh, and that was one of the early confusions too. It wasn't Scalise that he put the tourniquet on either. It was somebody else who was shot in the dugout with him, a staffer.
Right. So, but always the stories you get right away, especially that morning, are going to be semi-wrong. It's just, it's interesting putting the whole picture together.
Crime scene. It's confusing and terrible, and I fault no one. Rand Paul, the one thing I do fault him for is, of course, getting on TV and saying massacre, killing field, politically motivated. All those things. It's not those things, but I just wanted to remind everybody. Massacre,
well, that's part of what I wanted to talk about. I think that there are three big stories today.
All righty.
And one of them, of course, is the revelations in the Washington Post, New York Times, etc., that Trump is in fact under investigation for obstruction of justice.
What?
Or as I suppose the lawyers say it, possible obstruction of justice. The second big story, and not in importance, is of course the shooting, and we will have stuff to say about that. And the third big story is the healthcare as it proceeds through the Senate, unseen by human eyes, because nobody really seems to know exactly what's in it, although we do have an inkling.
Could Rand Paul help us with that? We're having vision problems.
Well, I don't know. I think he's, not going to.
Although,
he might be one of the no votes, though. It might be that he does help us because it might not be conservative enough for him.
He did spend an awful lot of time being super concerned about the secrecy on the House bill, and he was
right. But
livid.
I don't trust him any more than I trust Susan Collins. So we'll see about that.
I like to say that we don't trust them any further than we can throw them, and I would like at some point, if we could arrange it, to get a chance to see how far I can throw him.
Right. So James Hodgkinson, who is this deceased shooter, it turns out that the Belleville News Democrat, I think is the name of the paper.
Democrat, aha. Yeah.
Let's see if that's correct. The Belleville News Democrat, the local paper.
Illinois?
In Illinois.
Okay.
Had the most information about him. Not surprisingly, it's local paper and they can talk to local people.
Right. They know if he was in Little League.
And here's what they have to say about him, among other things. His life was struck with tragedy in 1996. The Hodgkinson's foster daughter killed herself at the age of 17 in a brutal manner, doused herself with gasoline and set herself on a fire inside her car.
Holy moly.
On a rural road south of Belleville. The Hodgkinson spoke to the News Democrat at the time, saying they didn't know what triggered a very practical, level-headed girl to kill herself. Later, they discovered there had been a previous suicide attempt before Ashley came to live with them. And then hours before she completed her suicide, her boyfriend had broken up with her. And then in December 2002, this is all reading from the paper, the Hodgkinsons assumed legal guardianship for their 12-year-old great niece. The biological parents' rights had been revoked. She had been in foster care with the Hodgkinsons since she was 4 years old. Her name was eventually changed to Kathy Hodgkinson. But the couple's, in the couple's latest annual report regarding the girl, they said she was returned to state custody. And court documents didn't state why the judge took that action. In a court document filed on December 26, 2006, the Hodgkinsons wrote, since then, His Honor has seen fit to award guardianship of Kathy to our next-door neighbors, which is a quite stressful and uncomfortable situation for our family.
Huh.
Also, in 2006, his shotgun was confiscated after a domestic fight between Hodgkins and his daughter and two of his daughter's friends. The charges were dismissed. He has had other minor charges, including a DUI, resisting arrest, in 1993 dismissed, for which he received court supervision. And the point I'm making with all of this is the fellow had a troubled life. And it's not unusual when you look and see these male shooters, and they're often male, wind up having a relatively troubled life.
Yes.
And for whatever reason, and you know, his business had gone under. He had not renewed. I guess he was a home inspector, and the license hadn't been renewed. And he didn't really have a home. He was estranged from his family. He was living in his car in the Virginia area for 2 or 3 months prior to the shooting. And all of that is not an explanation, and it's not an apology, and it's not anything other than to say things were not going well in his life. And it's not unusual when you see a shooter in a mass shooting, whether they take it out on work people, you know, which may well have happened in San Francisco yesterday as well.
Yep. Or
whether they take it out, as in this case, on perceived enemies. A lot of this is what you might call externalization of shame. That is to say, we talked about this on the show in a different context, trying not to shame Trump voters. But one of the primal triggers for males is shame. As for women, it's isolation. And shame is a very powerful motivator of thing, and trying to avoid it is a powerful motivator of thing. And it's not, you know, I'm not a psychiatrist. I don't play a psychiatrist on the radio any more than I play a lawyer. But it's not unusual in this setting, and you've studied these mass shootings even more than I have. It's not unusual to find somebody who, in their own life, has some shame and or inadequacy, externalizes it, and picks a target.
Yeah.
And whether the target is the school, and the people in the school happen to be, you know, secondary, it's really shooting the school in a kind of a symbolic way, or shooting the workplace in a kind of symbolic way. Too bad that people are really there and actually get hurt.
Right.
What winds up happening is that you externalize the shame and you take it out on somebody else, which, you know, seems like, at least from what we know, what might have happened here. And as a result, you know, you wind up shooting at stuff. Now, if you've got this, haphazard life where things have fallen apart, sometimes you look to see if you can find anchors. And one anchor might be working for a campaign where you get a sense of belonging. Yeah. And so the idea that somehow or other it was this campaign or a Bernie campaign that was relevant, I'm not sure. And the fact that he shot at his enemies, you know, again, I'm not sure that it has anything to do with this whole political rhetoric about, are you nice to people or are you not nice to people? This is the pattern you see a lot in other shootings, and this seems to fit that pattern, at least so far as what we know, obviously with a lot more to learn.
Well, I guess so. Let's see. Oh, I'm being told for some reason our feed has dropped. I see that my connection is still on. So, hopefully we'll be out and broadcasting, and if not, of course, we'll always be out with our podcast.
We have the podcast, so.
Yeah, we're still having to rely on sort of a jury-rigged studio situation at the moment, but we'll be back, I think, in our regular place by tomorrow. But anyway, definitely true.
The note is the feed is back, so for those who might have missed it, we were just talking about the fact that if you have a situation where you have a loner or somebody who doesn't quite fit in an awkward way, having a lot of things go wrong with their life, then to externalize it and blame other people and take it out on them is certainly not unheard of.
Right. And it is interesting the point you were making about shaming and the sometimes detrimental effects that it can have and different ways that it can manifest itself. I'll remind everybody that, of course, all of that focus had been on shaming Trump supporters. But yesterday's politicization, as part of it anyway, of the events of yesterday was that they were making a point of saying that this shooter, had spent some time volunteering on the Bernie Sanders campaign, and he was anti-Trump, although apparently his Facebook feed was as much anti-Hillary Clinton as anti-Trump. Not unusual among a certain segment, anyway.
That's another part of it, because to have trouble with women and domestic issues is certainly also not unusual in the profile of a shooter.
That's true, too. Of course, we'll probably see no in-depth series or think pieces about not shaming and how we have to reach out and understand Bernie Sanders supporters at any point, but
well, that's the thing, and the reason I'm describing it in this way is that it has so little to do with him being a Bernie supporter and so little to do with him shooting a Republican. He was looking for a target. He joined the Bernie campaign because he was looking for people to bond with if he possibly could. Doesn't sound like he did a great job in doing that. And when you go out looking for enemies, you find them where you can. It happened to be, in this particular case, Republicans or Trump or whatever you want to put it, but it could just as easily have been, if this didn't work out, a former workplace. Yeah. It's just not that different.
And it ended up being the place that was across the street from the YMCA where he was crashing. So, and I guess there was some discussion early on in the day, and I'm not even certain what the status of this claim is anymore, that he had asked whether it was Democrats or Republicans on the field. It was apparently...
He may have. I mean, other people happened to be of interest and jogged by who were separate who asked that question. Yeah. And so a lot of it got conflated together. But even if he did, that still doesn't negate what I was saying in terms of picking a target. No, he really did pick a Republican target, but he was looking for a target. That was the more important thing. That it happened to be Republicans is because in his mind, he saw them as perceived enemies.
Yeah, we certainly don't know what does he do if the answer is Democrats. I don't know whether it's he turns around and leaves or he shoots more of them. I'm not certain.
Or what if there's no opportunity to do so? Does he then go and take it out somewhere else in some other perceived target that he felt hurt him?
Or whatever's down the street, right? Well, plenty of questions, no answers.
Right, and it's interesting because, speaking of shaming, because when I posited this online, I got a tiny little bit of feedback from my conservative friends about, you're trying to deflect the issue. Actually, no, really. We're trying to talk about what the issue is. But that's okay. I mean, in the 24 hours after, the fact of the matter is we don't have enough information to really know that. I'm just saying in terms of looking at the profile of other shooters, wouldn't be, totally out of the realm of consistency.
Well, these shootings are all complicated behind the scenes. Pretty simple when the shooting starts in terms of, okay, people are being hurt and killed here and we need to put a stop to it, and wouldn't it be great if it was harder to get guns? But the background of any problem, whether it's something that with a tragic outcome or not, it's always complicated. That's what we're here to tell you. Everything's got shades to it. So
it does, and we'll learn a lot more. So let's turn to the other big story. We have a lot of those. From the Washington Post, I think, is the one who broke it first. And the story there was special counsel is investigating Trump for possible obstruction of justice, officials say. And goes on to talk about the fact that it's a major turning point because although Trump kept making this huge big point of I'm not under investigation, I want you to, James Comey, tell me that I'm not under investigation.
Yeah.
I'm going to pressure you to say that. I'm going to fire you for not saying it enough. And now because of that, I'm under investigation. And the New York Times has picked up on that and said that it also includes talking to Admiral Mike Rogers and to Dan Coates about whether or not they were pressured to do anything which would expand the idea that there's an obstruction of justice sort of thing going on here. And there's stuff in the Wall Street Journal too. But many of these stories point out that it isn't just looking at the obstruction of justice part. It's also looking to see whether there are financial ties and other things that need to be investigated with people close to Trump, as they describe it.
Financial crimes.
Well, all of the things that we wound up talking about and speculating about are right there.
Yeah, whoops. Yeah, and in the last couple of days, too, lots of mention or lots of throwing around of the words money laundering, although a few people who have tossed the term around have tried to duck it cleverly. I think David from tweeting yesterday, I'm not going to call this money laundering, but if you were looking for money laundering, it would look exactly like this.
Yeah, and the whole real estate business is pretty shady anyway.
Yes.
So, are you going to find stuff? Absolutely.
Yes.
Now, how do Trump and Trump camp respond to that? I have a graphic at the very bottom. It says final.png. If you're looking to pick it, it's right below the AP NORC poll that we'll talk about too. Because a majority of Americans, let's just talk about that now while you're looking for it. A majority of Americans think that, Trump is meddling in the Russia probe. That's what the poll says. A clear majority of Americans believe Donald Trump has tried to interfere with the investigation into whether Russia meddled in the 2016 election and possible Trump campaign collusion. Just 1 in 5 support his decision to oust James Comey from the FBI. By the way, he's at 35% approval in this poll. Following Comey's blockbuster appearance before Congress, an Associated Press NORC Center for Public Affairs Research poll shows 68% of Americans are at least moderately concerned about the possibility that Trump or his campaign associates had inappropriate ties to Russia. Along partisan lines, for sure, 62% of Republicans say they're not very concerned, but over half Americans say they disapprove of Trump's firing of Comey, 79% among Democrats, and only 22% of Americans support Comey's dismissal. I think something like a third of Republicans are not cool with it. So there is more erosion of his base. And the graphic that I was talking about is a series of tweets between Trump and Newt Gingrich this morning. I'll just read you 4 of them. Okay. From Trump, he says, they made up a phony collusion with the Russian story, found zero proof, so now they go for obstruction of justice on the phony story. Nice. Trump seems to be confirming that he is under investigation, by the way.
Yes.
You are witnessing the single greatest witch hunt. Witch hunt, of course, is in capital letters. He's not using his inside voice. In American political history, although, honestly, isn't this warlock hunt? Led by some very bad and conflicted people, make America great again. And Newt Gingrich says Mueller's clearly the tip of the deep state spear.
Oh, yeah.
Aimed at destroying or, at a minimum, undermining and crippling the Trump presidency. Mueller is setting up a dragnet of obstruction, financial questions in every aspect of Trump's life and his associates' lives. Very dangerous. So I'm thinking the boys aren't all that happy about how things are going this morning.
Yeah, I guess not. Too bad. I did see Simon Malloy, I think, tweeting this morning about Gingrich, essentially saying, look who's complaining about a special counsel's mandate expanding, uncontrollably. I forget exactly how he put it, but of course.
Why, has this happened before?
It has, under Gingrich's watch and indeed at his insistence. Of course, the Whitewater investigation, what we're talking about there it is. Look who's griping about a special prosecutor expanding the investigation of a president. Newt Gingrich, of all people. So,
if you look at it in that respect, and if you look at those tweets and you look at the whole, a big picture of the story, which is, again, all breaking last night, then you have to step back and say, is Trump really working himself up to the point of where he's going to wind up firing Mueller?
It's a possibility, of course. We spoke about it earlier in the week, and it hasn't gone away, and he's done nothing to dissuade anybody from it.
Right. People have tried, maybe the leak about all this stuff is leaking from his associates trying to convince him not to do it.
Yeah, maybe. That's a good idea.
But at the same time, we of course don't know that. At the same time, his tweets, as Tom Nichols, Radio Free Tom, said months ago, his tweets are a window into his mind, into his thinking.
Yes.
And so if he starts to get more and more angry on his tweet storms in the morning, when he gets up and he starts to do this, then you get an idea that he's working himself up to do something because this is what he's thinking.
I guess so. I was thinking this morning, watching him rant about this stuff, this would be like of course, we do have recordings of the Nixon White House, but I don't think there were any tapes.
We don't need recordings. We have his tweets.
Right. It would be like bugging the residents during the time when, in Watergate, when Nixon was like walking the halls, boozily ranting at the portraits.
I'm waiting for the next tweet from Trump to say, help me before I fire again.
I guess so.
But what would politically happen if, in fact, he went and did that?
Yeah, that's a good question. An open question.
For behind-the-scenes people, you read this all the time. I've talked to people who have contacts in the House you hear all the time, this is the red line. He fires Mueller, it's the red line, and that's where Republicans will publicly start to break, and they're trying to talk him out of doing that because they don't want to be in that situation.
Yeah.
That's what you hear. Is it true? Well, no. We may be in the position of actually finding out.
We might be, although, I mean, I hear just as often that, if he fires Mueller, then you better believe we're going to immediately get another special counsel, or reauthorize the independent. Right, he said reauthorize the independent counsel statute. Which,
but the fact of the matter is that the investigation is going on the one hand, and on the other hand, you may not have people in Congress, Republicans specifically, turning around and say, "Okay, I'm ready to impeach," but they may well support Schiff, and Schiff may, say this. He's not a out in front, shoot at the hip kind of person. He may have been tweeting that because he's talked to his colleagues, and that's what they tell him.
Maybe. I mean, if that's shooting from the hip, I mean, that's some pretty conservative shooting.
That's what I'm saying. It's also he's very careful about this. So if he said something like that from him specifically, as opposed to some of the others, I take it seriously, and I hear this from other sources too. Yeah. I mean, I take it seriously, and then I believe he believes it, but I don't know if... Yeah, as to whether it happens or not, it's a completely different story we'd have to see.
Yeah, I'm sure he talked to colleagues. Well, if he does that, then we're definitely going to... You would vote for reauthorizing...
Yeah, Susan Collins might have told him, if he does that, I will definitely be troubled.
You bet, and I'll definitely... I'll vote for that.
I may have to send a sternly worded letter.
Yeah, and then when the vote comes up, not really.
I'll go with the Republicans.
Yeah. All possible. So, yeah, I mean, ultimately, can he fire him?
It would be a really big deal, and it would put people in a lot of pressure on people. And in fact, some of the pressure that this puts on people is that if you're working on this, you're not working on healthcare and other issues.
Yes, true.
Let alone tax reform.
Yeah. So all of that happening in the background, more emerging about the healthcare bill, despite the fact that none of the text is emerging as well.
Third big story.
Okay.
It's exactly right. So what are the things that we know about it?
I don't know.
They're not only just talking about getting rid of pre-existing conditions. They're talking about getting rid of lifetime caps.
Yes, I hate caps.
This affects everybody who has employer-sponsored insurance or ESI. Yes. So if you think you have a job and it doesn't affect you because these are only these Medicare people and Medicaid people rather, that's not true. It affects everybody. 27 million people could face annual limits on their coverage and 20 million could be hit with lifetime limits. Another study came out just in the last 24 hours suggesting that out-of-pocket expenses may go up as much as 61%. And again, a reminder for people who haven't used their health insurance recently, you get mad when you think your premiums are going up. You get even madder when it turns out that what you have to pay out of pocket goes up despite the fact that you paid those higher premiums.
Yes.
It isn't just about the premiums. It's about the deductibles, and it's about how much you're ultimately going to wind up paying.
Yeah, that's the most irritating thing I think for most people with employer-provided health insurance.
Yeah, paying more and getting less.
Yeah, especially if your premiums are deducted without your having to write a check and send it to them, and you're aware that it's being deducted, or you're aware that you're paying, or even if you're paying directly from your own savings, with our checking account with automatic deductions. When you go to the doctor and they ask you for your insurance card and you fill out all those forms and all that paperwork, and you say, "Didn't I fill this out last time? I don't understand why you guys can't keep this." And maybe you could look into that for us, Greg. But
because it changes monthly, that's
right.
why.
I guess that's it. And you do all these things, and then you have insurance, and you're glad of it, and then you get home and you find out, oh yeah, well, you're going to have to pay $400, $500, $600 before your insurance kicks in, and you're not even sure who to be mad at first. The doctor's right there, but they didn't do it. The insurance people will never face you. But yeah, it's baffling to most people who are at first relieved that they have insurance, and maybe they can talk themselves into thinking it's a good thing anyway, because if they didn't have it, they'd have to pay $6,000. But writing that extra check, that's where it really gets you. And this is where it becomes plain that
it becomes
this affects
easy,
everybody.
And people can see it and understand it, even though the whole thing is complicated. This is an AP story, President Donald Trump promised to make health care more affordable, but a government report finds that out-of-pocket costs, which is deductibles and copayments, would average 61% higher under the House Republican bill. And even though the sticker price or premiums would be lower than under the Obama-era law, what consumers actually pay would edge up on average because government financial assistance would be curtailed. Mm-hmm. The report from the Office of the Actuary, a nonpartisan economic unit at the Health and Human Services Department, was released earlier this week with little fanfare, which is to say they didn't want you to look at it. And it's nonpartisan, so they probably don't believe it.
Yeah.
Anyway, so it's interesting 61%.
There. 61%. I'm just sort of thinking in practical terms, what that actually means, and if you're talking about all the out-of-pocket expenses. And for me,
they actually think, on average, people will be paying more, even though the underlying premium is less.
Yeah, and it's entirely possible. My usual, where I really notice out-of-pocket stuff for otherwise relatively healthy kids in particular is when I bring them to an urgent care place. And in the last couple of years, the copay for bringing them to urgent care has gone from $25 to $75. Mm-hmm. And a 61% increase now is, you're talking about $120 stop if you just, look, I just need the kid tested for strep. And I
think it's an ear infection. Can you just look in their ear? Okay, that'll be $400.
So, yeah. Well, people begin to notice.
Well, you can go to the emergency room. It'll be $900.
Yeah. Right.
And you have to wait 3.5 hours.
And we've got insurance, and we've got, primary care
that's with
pediatricians.
insurance. If you didn't have insurance, it'd be thousands.
But, if he's got an ear infection or I think he's got strep throat and, trying to get into the pediatrician, that's fine. They can see you and you pay less when I get there, but I can't get there for 3 days. I need to know if he has strep now.
A lot of people have employer-based insurance.
Yeah.
And because of it, they are shielded from how much this stuff actually costs. When you don't have insurance, you know exactly how much because you get the bill.
Right.
You may not be able to pay it, but you get the bill. But people who don't have that and only see the copays have no idea, for the most part, how much this stuff actually is cost, how much everybody's getting billed for this. They'd be outraged, but they don't know.
Yeah.
Well, take it away and they will know. True. And that's one of the many, 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 many reasons why healthcare isn't the typical market that free marketers would like to say happens. Another reason is that the amount of health care goes up if the availability is there. Mm-hmm. And that's been known for a long time. You put more doctors in an area, more people are going to go see them, sometimes from pent-up need, sometimes from concern. So you spend more because there's more doctors. And so it's not like, if you put a bunch of doctors there, they'll compete with each other and prices will go down. That's not how it works at all.
Yeah, that's true. There's a lot of aspects to it that, really makes it foolish to discuss healthcare in the terms of free market. I mean, if you have no idea how much something is costing you,
But that's the philosophical underpinning behind why they're doing what they're doing. Larry Levitt points out HCA waivers can amount to pre-existing condition exclusion for things like pregnancy, mental illness, and substance abuse. Mental illness, based on what happened yesterday in Virginia and our previous discussion about that, I think is huge. And it's appalling that mental health would be on the chopping block here. And, of course, given the promises, forget about the need, given the promises that Trump made to his own supporters, that substance abuse would be on the chopping block as well. So not only might he fund it less in terms of the actual programs designed to deal with substance abuse, but he also, Trump, may be making it so that the insurance that is going forward doesn't cover it.
Not good, as he likes to say.
No, not good. So those are the three big stories and how they play. It's the only thing that is good about Trump being under investigation for obstruction of justice is that it eats up airtime so you don't wind up talking about this healthcare stuff.
Yeah, I guess there's that. But he's obstructing the rest of everything, too.
Right, but that's going to come out, and they're so afraid of it, they don't want to tell you what's in it. There are Republican staffers on the record who's saying we're not going to tell you what's in it because that would be stupid.
Yes, well, that was McConnell, I think, who was on the record saying, we're not stupid. We're not going to tell you what's in it.
We're not stupid. We're not telling you what's in it.
Yep.
If they pass this, then it's going to be their political necks. And it's going to push the country closer to single payer because there will be no middle. The AHA, the Obamacare stuff, was the middle ground. Try to preserve as much as possible of the commercial insurance business.
Yeah.
But if they turn those guys loose again with this bill and say they could charge whatever they want, decide what a pre-existing condition is in their own mind before they tell you, which is the way it used to be. What's a pre-existing condition? It's whatever the insurance company says it is.
Yeah.
You had a cold 3.5 years ago. I'm not insuring you. You have to pay 5 times more. What are you going to do about it?
And sometimes they'll change their minds about things. It's just like anything else with the insurance company. Their initial response is to say, if there's a thing we can say, whether it's true or not, that means we don't have to pay, and 50% of people will go away if we just say it, then say
Listen,
it.
what are they going to do? They're going to wind up, hiring, making this up, but you get the truthiness of it. They'll hire 10% of their staff in order to make sure that you get your benefits, and they'll hire 90% of the staff to make sure that you're not eligible.
Yeah, I mean,
because they make more money that way.
Right. It's just the way they train their people. The frontline people say no to everything, and if you can get to a
but
supervisor,
it's going to get worse because now they can.
Yeah.
So
this
big story
let you talk to a supervisor.
is being obscured by, of course, the shooting on the one hand, and the calls to be more civil. And I'm all for calls to be more civil. I'm a civil kind of guy. But thoughts and prayers don't get violence reforms passed, and thoughts and prayers don't help with this health insurance. And if you want to show me that there really ought to be more comity and that the two sides in Washington really ought to get along better, and that maybe tonight's baseball game will be the start of something big, show me the health care bill. Show me that you're actually inviting Democrats in to work on it. Show me that you're actually telling us what's in it. You don't change that, it's all crap.
Yeah.
It's all garbage. It's all talk. Not interested.
Well, that's...
And I'm a nice guy.
Bottom line, yeah. I mean, there's no other way to say it. Well, okay. We'll have to... I don't know what. Maybe the Republicans... What if they refuse to submit a lineup tonight before game time?
You mean they won't tell you until the game?
Right. Is there any way we can delay this in some way? Probably not.
I don't know.
All right. Well, no word on actually getting a hold of this text.
What if they hire the Red Sox to play for their side and they don't tell you and they insist, no, that's really us? I mean, how would you know?
Oh, that's true. Right. And if you complain,
I mean,
that's
about the level they function these days. So
yeah.
This is a great event. I'm not trying to make fun of that. I am certain. I believe every heartfelt description that says that congressional staff and Congress critters were shaken by this yesterday, without question.
I'm sure they were shaken.
So was Newtown. I understand it. Believe me. Mm-hmm. What are you going to do about
it? Nothing. They're not going to do anything about that, certainly.
So I'm not that interested in how you were shaken.
So, right. And it deserves no coverage. You can't cover nothing.
Mm. Well, you can. It's called the American Health Care Act.
Oh, well, there's something there.
You can cover nothing. Because nothing gets covered.
There's something. They just won't allow us to cover it. And by the way, I guess I should throw that out there, too, right? One of the other repercussions of the shooting yesterday, and something we didn't get to discuss on Wednesday, or even, I guess, this must have happened Monday, and even Tuesday we didn't get to this, was or at least for a brief moment, the Senate, the Republican Senate senatorial conference there decided that they were going to revoke the rights of journalists to interview members in the hallways,
right,
or film any interviews without prior permission from the target of the interview.
That lasted about 2 hours, but it was the thing for those 2 hours.
But it was interesting that they had thrown that one out there as an issue of member safety somehow.
Yes, because you might be looking over their shoulder and getting their PIN numbers.
Right. Then the next day they got a real issue of member safety handed to them. And interestingly, I did see some people pointing out they were willing to take action on member safety when it was, you might get video of me saying I am going to keep your health care future a secret from you. That's something we really need to act on and do something about. Whereas members being shot in the street, that was really someone else's fault and it's a mental health issue and there's nothing we can do about it except mental health.
You could argue that they were truly worried about what's going to happen to them if they do this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, that
one
they
weren't thinking of yesterday and that kind of thing. They were thinking of politically what happens.
Yep. Well, now they have 2 reasons to worry about it.
No, it's a big deal, and I think they should go back and reconsider everything they're doing and vote the way I think. But, whether it'll happen or not, I'm not holding my breath.
Yeah. Well.
Anyway, to me, those are the 3 big stories. It's healthcare, and we shouldn't lose sight of that. Again, in no specific order. There's, of course, the shooting, which is a big deal. And there's the Trump under investigation, which I think, even more than the shooting, as days go on, we've seen this, and you get further and further away from the actual shooting day.
Yes.
We'll be spending a lot more time talking about Trump being under investigation.
Yes. No doubt about that, and that will continue as well. So, okay. I think
so. With that, that's the summary for today with references. So you or Scott Anderson or whoever puts together the summary later can have those things. But in the meantime, this is great work in speaking with my friend David Waldman Kagro in the morning, trying not to be too hypocritical about thoughts and prayers. We like thoughts and prayers. There's nothing wrong with them. Just, follow it up with action.
Them all the time. Right. I mean, if it's a substitute for action,
good. If it's a start and then you do action, that's fine. So take care, and I will talk to you on Monday, I guess.
I think you should talk to me on Friday, and I am going to offer my thoughts and prayers and see if you come in. But otherwise, Monday will be fine.
Well, I could listen.
Okay. Well, that's a step forward.
And not do anything. I mean, isn't that the standard?
Well, I don't know. What happens when you pray normally?
I don't know.
I
don't always get what I want. I know that.
Oh, okay. Okay. Well, you can't always get what you want.
But you sometimes find you get what you need.
Let's write that down. Thank you, Greg.
All right. It would be a good song. Take care, and I'll talk to you next week.
All right. Terrific. We'll try that. Give that a shot, by the way. Next time a major issue comes up or Republicans say or Donald Trump tweets, Obamacare is a disaster. People are losing their health insurance. They can't afford it. We have to do something about it. You can say, thoughts and prayers. My thoughts and prayers are with those who are losing their health insurance, as you claim. And I guess that's about it. Looks like I'm done. Hey, I got a thing. I got to run. Thank you very much. But no, they insist on action for that one. But I don't know. For some reason, when you start shooting people, thoughts and prayers should pretty much do it. Well, keep it up, I guess. And I don't know. We'll see how it works out for you. Anyway, let's see. Other stories either cropping up that we haven't mentioned or things that need more attention. Sure, of course. Let's see. What have we got? In addition to the... look at this. This is a funny way of displaying things in Pocket here. I have the Washington Post story, of course, on Mueller's investigation, and we should parse through it a little bit because I haven't read all the way through it yet, and we should get up to date on these things. Today's household maintenance issues will be the termite guy, but he doesn't come until after the show, so that's good. So what are prices on termites these days anyway, and how many termites do I need? Does anybody know? We'll find out what they're willing to sell me later on. Special counsel, though, investigating Trump for possible obstruction of justice, officials say. And it is really hilarious watching Trump tweet about this morning. And I mean, it's like he steps in a bear trap and there's another, I don't know. And then he's going to walk around with it on his leg and then jam I know how to get this bear trap off of my leg. I'll stick it in this steel thing that snaps shut over here, and put it in a second bear trap to try to get the first one off. He's tweeting about, what was his morning thing? That they make up, in his view, the phony story of Russia collusion and then find no evidence and then charge me with obstruction of justice. I guess he's trying to say that the reason, now Democrats think the reason that they have found no evidence, which is not true, of collusion is because I'm obstructing them in their search for the evidence, and what a setup this is. Meanwhile, all of his tweeting and the firing and the inquiries about whether or not he's under investigation are the obstruction. you can very easily come out of a situation like this and say, you know, in the end, we found after a lengthy investigation that we didn't find evidence of collusion between you and the Russians. And I guess we might as well say now for the record, one, there's plenty of possibility that there was collusion between people connected to Trump, either closely enough that it's in substance Trump himself, or further out in the circles of influence of Trump world that would still be significant. There could be collusion between people not particularly significant to Trump world, but connected. There could be no collusion of any sort and still have been improper influence. And there could be nothing whatsoever, but still find evidence of obstruction of justice. The irony there, of course, would be that if you hadn't obstructed, we would have sooner come to the conclusion that there was nothing untoward happening at all, and we might have exonerated you for it. But instead, along the way, you laid out bear traps, and they kept snapping shut on your own feet, and we can see them now. You've got one on each foot and each hand. It's clear that you tried to obstruct justice, and you really shouldn't have, because justice, had it prevailed, would have cleared you in all this. That's entirely possible. In other words, just because someone's looking into whether or not you've done something wrong doesn't mean they will conclude that you have. And trying to push them off of the investigation, particularly if you really think you didn't do anything and you have nothing to hide, it's an extraordinarily stupid thing to be caught doing, that's for sure. I understand the impulse to do it. You'd say, well, you know, there's a huge risk that you might misunderstand something along the way. And you know how politics is, and there's all sorts of motivations, good and bad, to try and make something out of nothing, even if it's just saving face for the person who has spent all this time and money conducting the investigation. And that kind of risk I don't want to take. If you feel you've done nothing wrong, certainly the temptation to want to do all you can to dissuade people from investigating you. I mean, that's the best way to nip something in the bud, get people off the investigation. But when I guess he just doesn't understand the difference between being a private real estate developer and being president of the United States. And I guess we just never really thought he was going to wake up to that, or maybe some people actually said it'll dawn on him. I guess that was the pivot we were waiting for, when he would really realize that he wasn't a private citizen anymore, and that's never coming. He never differentiated between his money and the charity's money. He never differentiated between his money and other people's money. He never differentiated between taxes that he paid and taxes that his business paid. So there was nothing on which to base any hope that he would be able to differentiate between himself and the office either. And so here he is, providing evidence of obstruction of justice before we even get to the question of whether he did any of the things in the underlying charges. So let's take a look here at the Washington Post's piece. Let's see, Devlin Barrett, Adam Entus, Ellen Nakashima, and Sari Horowitz. And should I try reading this one off of the, I wonder if I can get this on the iPad instead, and then I can bring it closer and make it that much easier to read, because I'm so old. It's true, you know. All right, let's see. Should I look at it in original form? The special counsel overseeing the investigation into Russia's role in the 2016 election is interviewing senior intelligence officials as part of a widening probe that now includes an examination of whether President Trump attempted to obstruct justice, officials said. The move by special counsel Robert S. Mueller III, the whole name here, to investigate Trump's conduct marks a major turning point in the nearly year-old FBI investigation. And that's true. I mean, reminder, of course, Mueller's only been on the job for a month or so, which is part of what makes the idea of firing him so absurd. He's only been, not even on the job, it's been about a little under, I think, a month since he was named special counsel. And though he has moved quickly to hire staff, and I guess begin speaking to witnesses, he's said nothing in public. And so I guess Trump doesn't really understand that dynamic either. And I guess if you've become addicted to the ability to simply generate fake news and have people believe it, then maybe you come to believe that anybody can be fooled this way, and you simply need to declare that something terrible has happened or something untoward has been done by the special counsel, and people will simply agree that it is so. But the fact is, the only people that will do that are his base, and that was fine for the purposes of the primary, and it happens to have carried him in large part through the general election, maybe, depending on the outcome of this investigation in part. But I guess he just doesn't really know what to do with the other half of the country that's inclined not to believe him. So he just starts saying that he's done these terrible things, and he hasn't done anything yet. And what was it? Yesterday he was saying, it was talking points that were being circulated by the RNC. Right. I'll have to see if I can get a hold of a link to those. And I just saw people critiquing them last night and saying, well, look at this one in particular. There was one complaining that was just straight up standalone talking point of how long will this witch hunt nonsense go on? And though it's true that the FBI's investigation has gone on for about a year, that of course would be the investigation into Russian meddling in the election, which they've been aware of for about a year. But the part of it that includes Trump himself has, officially only been going on, I guess, for about a week or so since he started, really since Mueller was on hand to start asking questions about the dismissal of Comey. I mean, that was the first indication of something obvious and public that would lead to obstruction of justice charges for Trump himself. So we're really, for most people, the investigation of Trump, which is really what we're looking at, is about a week old. They forget, and I guess, partisans and Trump supporters will very quickly latch onto the idea that the FBI has been doing this for a year, but it was a very different kind of investigation at that point. And even so, even a year, I mean, compared to Benghazi, please. I mean, as far as the obstruction of justice thing goes, I mean, like I said yesterday I was like, how long is this going to drag on? Please. I got Chinese food that's older than this phase of the investigation. And I didn't have a refrigerator for a month. So you tell me what's going on here. Honestly, Hillary Clinton testified before the Benghazi committee for longer than this investigation has been going on. It's crazy to start whining about it now. But he's talking about the RNC, I imagine, is talking about the whole investigation, but nobody else knows that. They just don't know what political atmosphere they're playing in here. Anyway, here's the link to the talking points. We'll see if we can dig those up later on for your reading pleasure, I suppose, or if you need a purgative, maybe that will help you with that. All right, let's see. So on with the special counsel story. This is the hilarious part. Trump had received private assurances from then FBI Director James Comey starting in January that he was not personally under investigation. Officials say that changed shortly after Comey's firing. In other words, it was the firing of Comey that triggered the investigation of whether or not Trump had obstructed justice. The Russian meddling wasn't targeting Trump. It may have ended up there, but it wasn't targeting Trump. And I still don't know a whole lot of people who think that Trump at some point picks up the phone and talks to Putin or anybody else and says, you got to do some meddling in this election, please. I'll give you $100 if you do, or whatever, or they offered to make him president or to make it more likely. I mean, I still think the dominant narrative here is the one about the Russians having their very own motivations for meddling in the elections, many of which had nothing to do with or didn't even contemplate Donald Trump actually winning that election. And I think that's an important piece of the puzzle as a starting point, because I don't know how many people would buy the story that the Russians fixed in their mind that they wanted Donald Trump to be president and they could arrange that. I think more realistic Russians began this meddling with the premise that it was a win-win situation. We want to meddle in this election because if Hillary Clinton wins, and all indications are that she will, then we want to do everything we can to undermine the legitimacy of her presidency, to make it difficult for her to operate in domestic politics, and in particular in international politics. Hillary Clinton is going to be a formidable opponent of Russia in the international sphere. Donald Trump, we don't even know. Probably not. Although, at the outset, they probably said, well, will Donald Trump be better for us in the international sphere? And they probably said that's not even worth considering because Donald Trump isn't going to win. But sure, he would be better because he's a sucker. We saw when he was in Moscow for the Miss Universe contest. We know how many people in Russia that I know, if I'm Putin, how many people in Russia and sympathetic people in Ukraine and elsewhere, and former Soviet republics that are still affiliated with us or have some business dealings with us. We know how many people have business dealings with Donald Trump and how easy it is to manipulate him. So, sure, it would be great if he was going to be president, but he's not. And so if we meddle in the election and make it difficult for Clinton to establish the legitimacy of her own presidency inside the United States, that will be viewed internationally as weakness on her part, and she'll have much less leverage with American allies in dealing with Russia and our proxies elsewhere around the world. Any situation in which we would come in confrontation with the United States, we would fare better because people would always have in the back of their minds at least the thought that, yes, Clinton is certainly dedicated to containing our ambition in XYZ region, but throughout all of it, she's going to be distracted fighting a rearguard battle for legitimacy at home, and she's never going to be able to turn her full attention to this problem. She's always going to have one eye on the attacks being launched against her by her own domestic critics. And that's all they really wanted at the beginning. I suppose somewhere along the line, it's possible that they began to think, well, maybe we could really pull this thing off. But I mean, it's even that is hard to believe that, I mean, given how few Americans really understand our stupid system, the Electoral College, the 18,000 different voting systems that we've got, how widespread the efforts were and continue to be to suppress the votes of people most likely, and remember how sophisticated our profiling now gets with our machine learning. If that stuff is real, even if it's not real, it's a pretty reliable thing to be able to say, well, if you suppress the votes of people of color, you are cutting chiefly and almost overwhelmingly, certainly overwhelmingly, almost unanimously, that overwhelmingly, into their ability to produce votes for Democratic candidates. There just aren't a whole lot of people of color who are voting for Republicans. And gee whiz, I wonder what the reason for that is. So you do everything you can to minimize their ability to cast their ballots. That will 99% of the time mean taking a Democratic vote off the board. But the idea that the Russians and their hacking and their data processing and their intelligence sector, I guess if there are any Russians who are going to have any shot at understanding that our stupid system makes it possible, if you targeted things just right, I don't know. I mean, it happened, so now they have that understanding, but it would really surprise me if in the highest levels, the highest circles, or any circles in Russian intelligence or among their Russian mafia or whatever, that they said, well, look at this. If you were able to monkey with things in Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Michigan, you could actually put together a patchwork of electoral votes that would leave Donald Trump several million votes short in the popular vote nationally. But the way the Electoral College works, you could put together an Electoral College majority for him and he'd be the president. And it's not impossible. I mean, people study esoterica all the time, and certainly, I mean, we obsess over it here. It's just hard to imagine Russians, run-of-the-mill Russians, certainly it's very difficult to picture them, one, caring, two, understanding the system, three, actually engineering the math of it in such a way that it made sense, and four, saying, okay, well, how can I shave the margins in these states? And I guess if you say, oh, we're going to target some states, where do we have a situation where if we could just get somewhere between 2 and 5% of the total voting pool, who are 90% Democratic voters, shaved off here, that we could change the popular vote outcome in the state and therefore change the electoral vote outcome in that state. And I mean, I guess if you get that idea in your mind and you put some computers to work on it, and if your artificial intelligence stuff is working, I could see it spewing out Wisconsin. And I guess I'm not surprised necessarily with seeing it spew out Pennsylvania, although Michigan probably would surprise me. But, I guess, again, if you're just looking for a long shot and you're just thinking, well, it's win-win regardless, we really just want to undermine Hillary Clinton. But if along the way, if you could tell me that if it's a 3-state thing or maybe a 4th state somewhere that did or didn't work out, like the 19th hijacker, and you really began to manipulate things there, and you could come away with the victory. Well, then, sure, great. And I'd if I'm Russia, I'll greenlight that project. We're already doing all of this work to undermine Hillary Clinton. It doesn't take much more or much different stuff, and we don't have to risk any assets on the ground or anything. All of this is electronic. Yeah, go for it. Give it a try. But the idea that Donald Trump went to them and said, listen, you got to do this in Wisconsin and Pennsylvania and Michigan, and it'll work out just great. Trust me, I have a very, very, very difficult time believing. Now, could that be happening in Bannon's head or Stephen Miller's head or Robert Mercer's head? Possibly. Is that something you could hang Donald Trump? Or should we say, is that something you could hang on Donald Trump? Maybe with, conspiracy charges, not conspiracy theory in the sense that I think somebody is running a child sex ring out of a pizza place, but actual racketeering and corrupt influence, or a racketeer influence and corrupt organization, RICO Act kind of conspiracy, by saying, the spoke and wheel theory, that is not spoken, but spoke and wheel, that not everybody needs to know every single piece of the puzzle in order to be part of a coherent conspiracy. In other words, if Donald Trump, in hiring his staff, had reason to believe that these wheeler dealers either might pull something like this, or even if he really didn't know that they were capable, but he's happened to if you can prove that he just happened to put together a team that was able to pull off this most unlikely event, just his hiring of them might be enough to hang these charges on him. That's just sort of the way RICO goes. That's why defense attorneys very often hate the RICO statute, because it sometimes feels like the state sets itself up like a casino, ironically enough, that the house always wins, and it's almost impossible to beat the rap on RICO because you don't even need to know what you're doing. You just have to be making some affirmative predicate act to show that you're part of this conspiracy, which you as a defendant may have had no idea was even really coming together. But if from the outside to the prosecutors it looks enough like it was coming together in coherent fashion, well, if they can present it in coherent fashion and the jury can understand it in coherent fashion, you're sunk, which I guess brings us back to why not interfere with the investigation, considering many people who thought they were innocent of such things frequently find themselves the target of successful investigations and prosecutions under the RICO Act. But, well, I don't know, that gives some interesting context to all of this possibility. Okay. Let's see. Oh yeah, Armando, as a matter of fact, sort of agreeing along the way here that, generally speaking, Putin had a personal animus towards Clinton for a number of reasons, and just harming her was fun enough for him. I think that's really how they got into it. I really don't think that they thought that they could change the outcome of an American election, and I don't even know whether they think they could do that again, either next time for Trump or any time in the future. But again, there's no harm in trying for them, particularly if there's no real response from us. If we can never figure out how to respond to it, I don't know if we ever can. Because really, what's the answer? Anything short of nuking them might be worth risking from Putin's perspective. Anyway, this wasn't really the point of this whole article, but, well, it's been a pretty good jumping off point for a lot of interesting discussion so far. So let's continue on. 5 people briefed on the interview requests. Which interview requests? I guess of... Does it even say? It must have said, and I've forgotten since we jumped in. But 5 people briefed on the interview requests, speaking on condition of anonymity because they were not authorized to discuss the matter publicly, said that Daniel Coates, the current director of national intelligence, Mike Rogers, head of the National Security Agency, and Rogers' recently departed deputy, Richard Leggett, I guess, agreed to be interviewed by Mueller's investigators as early as this week. The investigation has been cloaked in secrecy, and it is unclear how many others have been questioned by the FBI. The NSA said in a statement that it will fully cooperate with the special counsel. We don't know how much credence to give that, and declined to comment further. The Office of the Director of National Intelligence and Leggett declined to comment. White House now refers all questions about the Russia investigation to Trump's personal attorney, Mark Kasowitz, which is amazing the more I think about it. I don't know if Kasowitz was the guy that they had in mind when a couple of weeks ago the news first broke that he was lawyering up, but I found it interesting, like, who do you go and get? And I thought, well, 90% chance that Trump goes and gets one of his favorite real estate attorneys. And I mean, man, if there's stuff that like rises to the level of treason involved, I mean, do you really want a real estate attorney doing this? I don't know what Kasowitz has defended in the past, but maybe he's up to the task. The officials said Coates, Rogers, and Leggett would appear voluntarily, though it remains unclear whether they will describe in full their conversations with Trump and other top officials, or will be directed by the White House to invoke executive privilege. They're still hinting at that. And by the way, one of the issues of the last couple days has been the goofy ideas about executive privilege that the Trump administration people have been inventing for themselves, including Sessions refusing to answer certain questions about discussions that he'd had with Donald Trump in case the president at some future point decided to invoke executive privilege, which is just not how these things work. But, you know, when you're not playing by the rules and you're firing people that shouldn't be getting fired and as a result are sitting there being investigated for obstruction of justice, I guess anything goes. The fact that you don't know or care how executive privilege works is no obstacle. It is doubtful that the White House could ultimately use executive privilege to try to block them from speaking to Mueller's investigators. Experts point out that the Supreme Court ruled during the Watergate scandal that officials cannot use privilege to withhold evidence in criminal prosecutions. Of course, if you just say, I'm not answering, you might find yourself in trouble. And then the question is, what do we do about that? Are we willing, short of impeaching the president, are we willing to say, well, okay, the director of national intelligence is going to prison now, here and now? I don't think, I've never seen anybody really have the political will to do that stuff in the modern era. So I am thinking, no, we'll just sit there and say, grr, this is making me so angry. It's such obvious obstruction of justice. I mean, I guess we could ask ourselves where Mueller goes with this. Supposing he, fast forward a year and the guy comes out and says, I got to tell you, rock solid case proving obstruction of justice. If this was anybody else, this case would be open and shut. I could do it in an hour. He's still going to have to sit there and say, so what do I do? Do I indict the president? Can I indict the president? Do I hand it over to Congress and say, if it's still in Republican hands, you really should impeach him. I'll say it outright. This is impeachable and you should do it because I could and would prosecute him if he weren't president of the United States. And the only way you can make him not president is to impeach him. And the minute you do, I'm going to put him in prison. Will they do anything? I don't know. The obstruction of justice investigation of the president began days after Comey was fired on May 9th, according to people familiar with the matter. And really, you didn't even need to get that on the record confirmed by anybody. I mean, duh. Of course, that's when the investigation began, but thank you for doing the work, Washington Post. The preliminary interviews scheduled with intelligence officials indicate that his team is actively pursuing potential witnesses inside and outside the government. That would be Mueller. Because if Trump's team is actively pursuing potential witnesses, that's just more obstruction of justice. The interviews suggest that Mueller sees the question of attempted obstruction of justice as more than just a he said. Interesting. There's no she in any of this, I guess, but why not throw them in symbolically? Or maybe we leave the women out of this one, right? A he said dispute, the worst kind. Between the president and the fired FBI director, of course. That's who the he's are. Investigating Trump for possible crimes is a complicated affair, even if convincing evidence of a crime were found. The Justice Department has long held that it would not be appropriate to indict a sitting president. Instead, experts say the onus would be on Congress to review any findings of criminal misconduct and decide whether to initiate impeachment proceedings. Comey confirmed publicly in congressional testimony on March 20th that the Bureau was investigating possible coordination between the Trump campaign and the Russians. Comey's statement before the House Intelligence Committee upset Trump, who has repeatedly denied that any coordination with the Russians took place. Trump had wanted Comey to disclose publicly that he was not personally under investigation, but the FBI director refused to do so. Even though he wasn't, the FBI director refused to do so. Here, I just want to bring it back to the same point that we always make. Every time I say that Trump can't or won't differentiate between himself and the office of the presidency, and he can't differentiate between the different, the differing latitude that he has as a private operator versus as president of the United States, and he can't differentiate between things that are his own property and things that are in his custody or control, and he uses them as though they were his private property. This has something to do with it. And this is the big irony of it all, I think, to me anyway, in that there's an investigation ongoing about collusion or cooperation or some kind of coordination between the Trump campaign and Russia. But because it's the Trump campaign, Trump makes it about him. And I mean, it's not an unusual or even illegitimate conclusion. It's just that if he had a legal mind or had hired someone who had a legal mind to advise him, they would have been able to tell him, listen, at this stage, although there's Trump all over the names of these things that they're investigating, you are not currently a target. You don't need the FBI director to confirm this. We can tell you that. We can tell you that. And we can tell you that with some great certainty because, in all honesty, this is the FBI you're dealing with. When they're going to make you a direct target of the investigation, in most cases, I guess in some they don't, but in most cases, I guess in terrorism cases, they won't often make that plain to you. But if you're a target of the investigation and you're president of the United States, you will find out. They will notify you. Yeah. But if you haven't been notified, the best assumption is that you're not. And because they were actually being quite plain about what they were investigating, and a normal person with a normal capacity and perhaps some legal training would be able to glean just from public statements, they're investigating the campaign entity. And yes, it implicates me because my name is on the campaign and it was my campaign. But it's pretty obvious that they're not investigating me directly. And that should be enough for you, but it wasn't. So he kept pressing because he doesn't understand what the hints were telling him. So he continued to press because he can't and won't differentiate between his campaign and himself and his reputation and himself and all things related to him and himself, and he thinks everything's related to him. So he ends up putting himself in position to be prosecuted for or investigated for obstruction of justice unnecessarily because of his inability to separate himself. Anyway, it's pretty amazing. Armando objecting in the background, by the way, too. I don't get the you can't indict a sitting president thing. You can't prosecute a sitting president, but you can indict him and then prosecute him when he's out of office. And that may be true too. I guess it's all yet to be proven because we haven't had that happen yet, I don't think. But yeah, I mean, the argument makes a good deal of sense. If the idea is that the sitting president can't be distracted from his duties because national security, and that's essentially the argument, fine. We'll indict you on some matter and wait until you're not president anymore, either because you're impeached or you simply have completed your term and have been replaced as president, and then we'll try you then. And that's no more a distraction than, well, I mean, I guess ordinarily I would argue, well, it's a huge distraction. As Trump would have it, a giant cloud over your presidency. However, since they decided that it was okay to proceed with a civil suit against a sitting president, that can't be any less of a distraction than the idea that you'll face indictment now and face trial sometime in the future. That, I don't see why that's any more psychologically debilitating than currently undergoing or currently suffering a civil suit to be prosecuted against you. So, whatever. Right. Okay. And that's basically what he's saying. That's principle underlying Jones v. Clinton. What makes a criminal matter different from a civil one? What's the basis for distinction? I see the point. I would be perfectly willing to agree that there is none. But I think that this gets, you know why this gets reported this way? Why do they report that it takes 60 votes to pass something in the Senate? It doesn't. It takes 50 or whatever, a bare majority. It's often thought to be 51 in a full Senate. Bare majority to pass any legislation, even legislation on which there's been a filibuster. You and I, as listeners to the show, know that what takes 60 votes is invoking cloture on the debate of the bill so that you can make the pending business before the Senate the vote on final passage, which itself requires only a simple majority. But in shorthand parlance for the newspapers, they simply say, well, they need 60 votes to pass it. There needs to be 60 votes put together for some other procedural stage of the proceedings so that we can get to the vote. So in that sense, 60 votes are needed in order to pass the thing. But technically they have it wrong. And I guess I would chalk it up to a similar thing, that you say, well, basically you can't indict a sitting president. Okay, you can indict one, but you can't do anything about it. You can't prosecute the indictment. Well, then that's basically like, well, can you offer your hopes and prayers that everyone will see that the president needs to be prosecuted? Sure, you can. Anybody can do that at any time, but it doesn't get the job done. So, okay, they confused themselves with it, and I can see how that can happen. But we'll make things clear. It'll just take 20 minutes. Hang on. All right, so where were we? We had just said that the interview suggests that Mueller sees the question of attempted obstruction of justice as more than just a he said dispute. Investigating Trump for possible crimes is complicated. Then we discussed that. Comey confirmed publicly in his public testimony, congressional testimony, that the Bureau was investigating possible coordination between the Trump campaign and the Russians. And by the way, for all the people in the Trump organization who said, well, what's wrong with that? That's also an interesting question, too. Now, coordination is a better word for it because we all know that you can't, for instance, if they said, well, there was coordination between the Trump campaign and a super PAC, you would all say, oh, right, well, that's totally illegal. Surely then, if we told you that there was coordination between Trump and a foreign government for the purposes of trying to win the election for Donald Trump, you would say, well, that's clearly worse. I assume most people would, maybe it isn't. Maybe it's not worse. I guess it maybe depends. What if it's a really nice foreign government and a really crappy super PAC? But surely, if it's illegal to coordinate with American actors organized as a super PAC, it should be illegal to coordinate with foreign nationals organized as a foreign government. Much worse if it is foreign nationals, and domestic actors intertwined, functioning on behalf of a criminal oligarchy, masquerading as a Western-style government. That would be worse. Anyway, let's see. Where were we? Comey's statement before the House Intelligence Committee upset Trump, who repeatedly denied that any coordination with the Russians took place. Trump had wanted Comey to disclose this and ended up making more trouble for himself because he couldn't distinguish between himself and the campaign and wanted to be cleared. And Comey couldn't offer him that because of the way he operates and the way he tries to keep, supposedly, the FBI out of these political settings. He's not super consistent about it, but that's what he says he was after. Officials said one of the exchanges of potential interest to Mueller took place on March 22nd, less than a week after Coates was confirmed by the Senate to serve as the nation's top intelligence official. Coates was attending a briefing at the White House with officials from several other government agencies, and when it ended, as the Washington Post had previously reported, Trump asked everyone to leave the room except, again, this is becoming a habit with him now, everyone leave the room except these two. I mean, this is pretty important. Everybody leave the room except Coates and Pompeo, the CIA director. Coates told associates that Trump had asked him whether Coates could intervene with Comey to get the Bureau to back off of its focus on former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn and its Russia probe. According to officials, Coates told lawmakers later that he never felt pressured to intervene, but he did say, he did ask me, can you intervene? Okay, so fine. I didn't feel pressured, but he did ask me. That's pretty damning all by itself. A day or two after the March 22nd meeting, Trump telephoned Coates and Rogers separately ask them to issue public statements denying the existence of any evidence of coordination between his campaign and the Russian government. Coates and Rogers refused to comply with the president's requests, officials said. It is unclear whether Leggett had any direct contact with Trump or any other top officials about the Russia probe, but he wrote an internal NSA memo documenting the president's phone call with Rogers, according to officials. So everybody's writing these memos. It's not just Comey. As part of the probe, the special counsel also gathered Comey's written accounts of his conversations with Trump. The president has accused Comey of lying about those encounters, although it seems like Coates and Rogers confirm them. That's the problem. Mueller is overseeing a host of investigations involving people who are or were in Trump's orbit. People familiar with the probe said the investigation is examining possible contacts with Russian operatives as well as suspicious financial activity related to those individuals. We've got to outline some of that specific suspicious stuff for you in a minute. Last week, Comey told the Senate Intelligence Committee that he had informed Trump that there was no investigation of the president's personal conduct, at least while he was leading the FBI. Comey's carefully worded comments and those of Andrew McCabe, who took over as acting FBI director, suggested to some officials that investigations of Trump for attempted obstruction may have been launched after Comey's departure, particularly in light of Trump's alleged statements regarding Flynn. I took it as a very disturbing thing, very concerning, but that's a conclusion I'm sure the special counsel will work towards to try and understand what the intention was there and whether that's an offense. Comey testified last week. Mueller has not publicly discussed his work, and a spokesman for the special counsel declined to comment. Accounts by Comey and other officials of their conversations with the president could become central pieces of evidence if Mueller decides to pursue an obstruction case. Investigators will also look for any statements the president may have made publicly and privately to people outside the government about his reasons for firing Comey and his concerns about the Russia probe and other related investigations people familiar with the matter said. Like, for instance, telling Lester Holt, yeah, I fired him because of Russia. Telling the Russians, yeah, I fired him because of you. Comey testified before the Senate Intelligence Committee last week that he was certain his firing was due to the president's concern about the Russia probe rather than over his handling of a now closed FBI investigation into Hillary Clinton's use of a private email server as Secretary of State, as the White House had initially asserted. It's my judgment that I was fired because of the Russia investigation. I was fired in some way to change, or the endeavor was to change the way the Russia investigation was being conducted. The fired FBI director said ultimately it's up to Mueller to make a determination about whether the president crossed a legal line. In addition to describing his interactions with the president, Comey told the Intelligence Committee that while he was FBI director, he told Trump on 3 occasions that he was not under investigation as part of the counterintelligence probe looking at Russian meddling in the election. That, of course, was seized upon by Trump as total and complete vindication of the one thing that he had claimed about Comey that was true, that Comey had told him he wasn't under investigation. You will be later for asking me 3 times, but you're not now. Republican lawmakers seized on Comey's testimony to point out that Trump was not in the FBI's crosshairs when Comey led the Bureau, which, of course, would call into question why he was fired, right? Isn't that interesting? I fired Comey, and he said as much, to get him, to get him off of the investigation, of the Russia investigation. And you did. Good job. You didn't get Comey investigating you. You got Mueller investigating you because you fired Comey for pursuing the Russia thing. But if your primary concern was whether or not you were being investigated, you were told 3 times that you weren't. Why wouldn't you keep Comey in place? If you did, Flynn would be in trouble, perhaps. And who knows who would be in trouble about working with or accepting, on a freelance basis, the work being done by the Russians as a good thing and not pushing back on it. But none of it so far would have led directly to Trump. The only thing that led directly to Trump was firing the guy who wasn't investigating you, kept telling you weren't being investigated, and probably had hinted to you that there was no indication that you were likely to become the direct target anytime soon. You could have sat and waited. But you decided to be, he gets things done. He acts, right? Well, he did. He acted. He fired Comey. Oh, imagine this. And of course, who advised him to do it? Probably Jared Kushner, according to all the rumors, who also knows nothing about this stuff and only made the problems worse. Maybe, again, maybe Kushner still not used to his public role either. He thinks he'll inherit the presidency if they impeach Trump. It doesn't go to Mike Pence. It goes to his next of kin. and Ivanka doesn't want it. So I'll take it. Who knows what he thinks. After Comey's testimony, this concludes, in which he acknowledged telling Trump that he was not under investigation. Trump tweeted that he felt total and complete vindication. It's unclear whether McCabe, Comey's successor, has informed Trump of the change in the scope of the probe. Although I think it's becoming increasingly clear, and he probably did tell him about it because the FBI tends to do such things. I don't know why all the time. And if you were under a terrorist investigation, they probably wouldn't. But this one, I think they will. Let's see. Oh, yes. Armando mentions on the coordination front the famous or infamous line about Russia, if you're listening. Which, I'd throw that out there. I'd say it certainly tends to show that he thinks that he's got Russia's ear, but it might just as well have been a tongue-in-cheek offering. Although, I guess there's other circumstantial evidence that alongside it says, well, sure, that's the kind of thing I would dismiss ordinarily as tongue-in-cheek, but for the existence of all this other evidence, which hadn't come to light at the time and now only makes it look that much more suspicious. So, you can argue against it, but it doesn't look particularly good given all this other stuff. All right. So I mentioned that there were other issues out here that this raised in my mind. Financial crimes. See, Armando is taking it seriously, if not literally, and that's what we were instructed to do. So there's no other conclusion we can come to here. Let's see. Where did I put this one? Here we are. Something that, oh, damn it. See, I went to the Hill again. But there's, let's see. Who's the Hill relying on in this? Maybe I, just for variety's sake, can see who's reporting they're discussing and find the original source, which would probably be a nice thing to do. USA Today. There we are. Let's go to USA Today. The other matters that might be coming under investigation: financial crimes, our mention of money laundering, etc. David Frum's tweet about money laundering. Let me see. I'll have to see if I can remember to dig that up for inclusion. But you know what? It won't make a great deal of difference in terms of getting the basic information here. This is, I thought, a really interesting thing. Not at all suspicious or weird, right? And again, I think we've done a pretty good job of giving you pieces of the puzzle when they've popped up so that you can plug this into the right part of the information map here. USA Today, running a story on June 13th, so it's now 2 days old. We would have discussed it yesterday, but for the pre-taping. Most Trump real estate now sold to secretive buyers. More secrecy stuff. Trump likes the secrecy, I guess, without even discussing the health care bill, about which I guess we'll still have more time to discuss things tomorrow. Most Trump real estate now sold to secretive buyers. This won't surprise any of you who have already heard the stories of, for instance, the Trump-branded condo towers in Florida, where, as we know, if not a majority, then a significant plurality of the units were sold to Russian nationals, Ukrainian nationals, etc. Some of whom, or people certainly of Russian origin, some of whom I guess may have become naturalized citizens, but lots of Russian and Ukrainian background and lots of mobster or shady money connected backgrounds in these towers. And of course, we learned early on in the campaign about the same situation obtaining in the big tower that matters. Trump Tower is chock full of Russian-connected folks, outright Russian mobsters, Russian nationals, etc. And we've discussed the outlines of a purported money laundering scheme in the past, particularly people who may have ill-gotten millions or even billions in Russia, who are looking to, 1, secure it, and 2, turn it into hard American dollars, and 3, have a place to parachute into if necessary, and 4, don't mind losing money so long as they can launder the most part of it into dollars elsewhere and avoid scrutiny and prosecution. As it turns out, it's still going on, and the pace is picking up. So what's up? Most Trump real estate now sold to secretive buyers. Who's our writer on this one? Did they give a byline to this one? USA Today has things formatted in a kind of funny way. There we go. It's up at the top. On a nice long name. We'll have to bring that one in. Nick Penzenstadler, Steve Riley, and John Kelly for USA Today. Let's take a look. Since President Trump won the Republican nomination, the majority of his company's real estate sales, again, since he won the nomination, the majority of his company's real estate sales are to secretive shell companies that obscure the buyers' identities, a USA Today investigation has found. What sort of obscure or shell companies would obscure buyers' identities, one wonders. And the answer largely is LLCs, which limited liability corporations, which of course is why I now go on Twitter as David Waldman, LLC. I'm not actually incorporated that way. I just think it's funny. That's all. Don't worry about it. And besides which, who cares? LOL, nothing matters. There's no such thing as law, so I am incorporated. Yes. And as a matter of fact, anything you might see me say on Twitter that's objectionable to you, I didn't really say. And it was said by some secretive entity, and I can't reveal who. Sorry. So that's what USA Today has found, that the majority of his real estate transactions are to anonymous buyers, essentially. Over the last 12 months, about 70% of buyers of Trump properties were limited liability companies, corporate entities that allow people to purchase property or anything else without revealing all of the owners' names. That compares with about what? In other words, before he was nominated, maybe Trump was just a big-time money launderer all the time. We learned about all of the, Trump Towers full of Russians. It always was. The South Florida towers full of Russians, they always were, right? But how much of his real estate prior to his becoming the Republican nominee for the most powerful office in the world, how much of his real estate transactions were to anonymous buyers? The answer is 4%. Now that he is nominated and then eventually becomes elected, quote unquote, as president of the United States and can do all of these great things for people, people want money in his pocket with their name on it, but they don't want the name to be revealed publicly. They want to be able to wink and nod to him and say, by the way, that LLC is me. I did it. And now I need a favor from you. But they don't want anybody else to be able to track that down. Now it's gone from 4% to 70% of the sales. And by the way, keeping control of your companies, no conflict of interest. Why not? Because the president can't have conflicts of interest, they claim. Remember you remember, everybody remembers here certainly, but the rest of you Americans who haven't been listening to the show, shame on you for one thing. For another thing, my guys are going to go out and get you. They're going to talk to you at cocktail parties and they're going to explain this to you. The whole reason it was a big deal, the whole reason he was supposed to have liquidated his holdings in the Trump organization and not just handed them off to his sons who are clearly so entwined in his day-to-day foibles as president that they constantly are tweeting political defenses of these things, even though their heads are supposed to be elsewhere and specifically not over here, right? But he's never divested himself of any of the interests seriously in all of these organizations and still sitting at the head of it, still drawing income from it. We discussed this also on a past show that we found out that the terms of the trust he established that was supposedly he was passing off as either a substitute for or identical with actual divestment. The paperwork that he presented eventually, not the blank paper in the folders that he showed in early January, but the paperwork that he actually eventually presented showing how he was structuring his holdings such that they would not present the conflict of interest said, yes, he can continue to, well, one, it's a irrevocable trust, which means all the stuff goes back to him once he's not president, and two, that he could draw income from it while president. So isn't that convenient? What a fantastic feature that he put in there. And we just didn't know what to do with it because so many other stupid things were happening that we couldn't retain focus on this. But I guess Mueller will have the ability to do that and the ability to task someone to it. So in all of this, after not divesting himself of these companies, after insisting in the paperwork that he could in fact draw as much income from the Trump organization as he wanted to while sitting as president, it turns out that over the last 12 months, 70% of the Trump organization's real estate sales have been from anonymous buyers and LLCs. USA Today journalists have spent 6 months cataloging every condo, penthouse, or other property that Trump and his companies own and tracking buyers behind every transaction. The investigation found Trump's companies owned more than 430 individual properties worth well over $250 million. And let me see if I can't bring this up in a more easily readable format right here. Okay, yes, excellent. And bring it a little bit closer. Okay, boy, I am getting old. This setup just doesn't really lend itself to easy reading. Since election day, when we found out he won, Trump's businesses have sold 28 of those U.S. properties for $33 million. And I guess I should point out here, we did want him to sell those properties. He should have liquidated his properties, before this point. But I guess as it becomes clear, he surprises everybody and becomes president. He should be liquidating those properties. And remember also that he said that it was the reason he wasn't divesting himself of his properties was because it was of the impossibility of liquidating. He liquidated $33 million worth pretty quick. And I think they probably could have done more if he had set his mind to it. Remember, he said, I'm not liquidating it. And yet he did liquidate some part of it. $33 million worth. $33 million out of $250 million in discrete pieces of real estate that he could have sold off. I think with a concerted effort, he could have done this. Anyway, since Election Day, 28 of those properties sold for $33 million, which I guess is like just a little bit over $1 million a piece, which is small potatoes for Mr. Billionaire. The sales include luxury condos and penthouses in Las Vegas and New York and oceanfront lots near Los Angeles. The value of his company's inventory of available real estate remains above $250 million. Profits from sales of these properties flow through a trust run by Trump's sons. The president is the sole beneficiary of the trust and can withdraw cash at any time. In other words, it's 100% possible for Russian oligarchs, anybody for that matter, to simply say, I'll take one of your condos. What's the price? They're $1 million a piece. I'll take one for $10 million. Okay. And, the money, it goes to you, right? Well, yes, it can. And it still can because he's the sole beneficiary of the trust that takes the money in and he can withdraw money from at any time. So absolutely, yes, I can take your $10 million and pocket it while I'm president. Excellent. Exactly the situation I was looking for. Please do it. And we are set. We're stuck sitting here waiting for USA Today to find it out. But now we at least have Robert Mueller to take a look at this stuff. It's astonishing because I don't know what to tell you. I mean, it's like dumbfounding that we're standing here having had this conversation already and having his lawyers stand there and look into television cameras and say, there's no conflict of interest. And even if there was, it wouldn't matter because it can't happen. There's no such thing as a conflict of interest for the president. And this is happening right in front of us. And we're like, well, did he obstruct justice? Can we impeach him for that? Yes, absolutely. But you can also do it for this. And thank God, at least they're hinting that Robert Mueller is having a look at this stuff too, because this is even more obvious. Anyway, the increasing share of opaque buyers comes at a time when federal investigators, members of Congress, and ethics watchdogs are asking questions about Trump's sales and customers in the U.S. and around the world. Some congressional Democrats have been asking for more detail about buyers of Trump's domestic real estate since USA Today's initial report. Their concern is that the secretive sales create an extraordinary and unprecedented potential for people, corporations, or foreign interests to try to influence a president. Anyone who wanted to court favor with the president could snap up multiple properties or purposefully overpay without revealing their identity publicly. It's as if I had written this USA Today report, but done it in November. Anyway, but I didn't. So, I don't know. Maybe I did. I mean, I didn't write this one, but I say things like that all the time and admonish myself for not writing these things. But I do have a radio show and I do say these things, and some of you have listened to it, and so you can vouch for me. Please do. Tell people that they can get the news early. And it's not even that I'm speculating beyond what's proper. I'm almost always reading the best hints of this stuff from media sources. Our rotten, stupid liberal media that doesn't do anything right is the one that's digging up the clues that makes all this speculation possible. And you know that they've come to this conclusion. They just can't print it. Their editors won't let them print it until they do more of the groundwork to nail it down. Well, Mueller can do this groundwork now. That's the good news. Somebody who can actually at least indict somebody about this stuff. All right. The real estate cash, which Trump has never fully revealed and is not required to disclose by law because norms used to take care of it, offers unique opportunity for anyone to steer money to a sitting president. The increase in purchasers shielded by LLCs makes it far more difficult to track who is paying the president and his companies for properties ranging in price from $220,000 to $10 million or more. Gee whiz, didn't I just say $10 million? The clear post-nomination shift since last year to more shell company purchases is unique to sales by Trump's companies, even in his own towers and neighborhoods. Condos owned by others in the same building and sold during the same period were bought by LLCs in no more than 20% of the transactions. In some areas, the share was far less. If what's going on is somebody is buying something from the Trump organization to buy favor, there's no way you'd ever figure out who that person is or what favor they're trying to buy, said Jack Blum, a Washington attorney specializing in offshore tax evasion and financial crime and former staff lawyer of 2 U.S. Senate committees. I wonder if Jack Blum will end up on the Mueller team. They probably don't need him. They've got someone just as good, I'm sure, but it would be funny to see that happen. This is like an open bid for a job. The reason for the shift is unclear. The White House refers all questions about Trump's businesses to the Trump Organization, which would not answer questions about the sales. Experts in real estate and corporate law say there are many reasons to create an LLC and use it to buy property. Some buyers, including celebrities, foreign political dissidents, and even police officers, may use them to protect privacy. Investment groups use them to purchase properties in partnership. The method is more common among the wealthy, because they're different or famous, in the buying of multi-million-dollar properties. For instance, President Obama and his wife are behind Homefront Holdings, LLC. That is interesting, right? You might wonder why that's necessary. You could investigate if you want. A corporation registered in Delaware, which ordinarily raises an eyebrow, although everybody does it, but it raises an eyebrow. But you could just say, oh, he's just trying to help out Joe Biden's state. You could excuse it that way. Homefront Holdings, LLC. Interesting. Anyway, that group in May purchased the family's home in the Kalorama neighborhood of Washington, D.C. for $8.1 million, according to district property records. If I had to speculate, I would say that the reason is, it's clear that everybody knows kind of where the president lives. Even though they try to keep it somewhat under wraps, it's pretty obvious and it's been reported. So my guess is that is done for reasons that Republicans would say are nefarious and suspect, which is that it's likely that the president didn't have $8.1 million in cash to purchase this home. And you wouldn't have to. Of course, you could just buy a mortgage or anything, but a mortgage on $8.1 million. And although he's going to have the income from speech making, no doubt, and books, etc., to cover that, well, my guess is that friends of the president are partners in Homefront Holdings, LLC, and are lending him the money that he needs to make up the difference at a rate substantially more preferential, a better rate, certainly on interest, if any interest is being charged at all, than you would be able to get on an $8.1 million, or if you only had, if you had $3 million, $5 million mortgage. In other words, he's saving a great deal of money by having friends loan it to him rather than borrow it from a bank. And while that might be of concern if he were still sitting in office, he's not. So, whatever. And you could be concerned about who the friends are and whether he's using his remaining influence as a former president to prevail upon sitting Democrats in the legislature to be more favorably inclined to the kind of people who are able to lend him that much money, and that's usually Wall Street. There's that. That pretty much a carryover from most of the criticisms, I would say, probably of Hillary Clinton. That situation being a little bit different in that when Bill Clinton left the presidency, and they probably did much the same sort of thing in order to buy their house. I don't know that for sure, but I wouldn't be surprised. But at that point, of course, Hillary Clinton actively considering running for Senate. Then, of course, she did become senator. Then, of course, Secretary of State, then running for president. Michelle Obama with no announced plans at this point, but I guess there were no announced plans at that point for Hillary either. But I don't know. I don't know if I really see her going into electoral politics, but they could prove me wrong, at which point then people can start accusing them of wrongdoing through home front holdings and see if that leads anywhere. Anyway, that's interesting. There are more nefarious reasons to use LLCs, including to illegally hide assets, shield profits from taxation, and launder drug money or funds embezzled from a foreign company or government. Yes. Even when LLCs are used legally, they can hide the identities of the buyers. USA Today found no sales by Trump companies that were obviously above the market rate that I often speculate about, based on analysis of comparable properties in the same buildings and neighborhoods. And the LLC, I think, obviates a lot of the need for that. That's probably a great savings structure for once the Russian oligarchs began to find out that they didn't really need to identify themselves in the buying, then they didn't have to lose as much in the laundering. I think that's probably largely what happened. Anyway, in Las Vegas, condos sold by Trump's company sold within a few dollars per square foot of other resellers' units in the buildings. Prices were near flat. So at least they're not, they don't appear to be jacking up the prices at this point. And the LLC structure, I think, saves people a lot of money. There's plenty more to the article. We're clearly not going to be able to get all of it in here, but maybe we can get back to the details of it in further discussion tomorrow. But I think you have got the gist of this. These are probably parts of the financial crimes that at least peripherally are going to be investigated by Mueller, basically to see if they can, I would think, run down some of the identities of the people behind these LLCs, and if they turn out to be Russian, see if they are in any way connected to the Russian government, and whether or not they can establish a case that alleges basically that perhaps Putin or others may have directed them to buy it, or maybe it was simply coincidental. And they can say, well, Putin could be claiming credit for directing a lot of these sales. If it comes to be Trump's understanding that Putin is his best real estate sales agent, that may be enough to get the job done, even if it's not true. I'm aghast. What if Putin is lying to poor President Trump about the fact that he's directing people to buy Trump properties? Maybe they were all inclined to buy Trump properties anyway, and he's simply taking credit for things that he hasn't been urging people to do. How crooked. My goodness. Well, I'm sure that he would like to know about that. And maybe that's the silver lining of the investigation, is it's clearing up how little you really owe to Mr. Putin to begin with. So you ought to be thanking us for it, and all true patriots ought to hope that we come to that conclusion. Okay, time to hand things over to the guys on the after show right here on Netroots Radio. It looks to me like we might have had some additional, well, hopefully we haven't flickered in and out too often. And the signal will stay strong for you to stay tuned for the Thank God It's Jovidi Thursday version of the After Show, on which you'll hear more about stories like the following. American women owe nearly twice as much of the nation's student loan debt as men do. And garment workers at Ivanka Trump's Indonesian factory cannot afford to live with their children. And dozens of Muslim boys up early for Ramadan played a key role during the Grenfell Tower rescue in London. Yes, a story we haven't been able to pay attention to here because there's too much on fire right here in the United States. More
from
after
Daily
this.
Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waltman.
Also, they'll be raising the alarm that on the eve of those Georgia special elections, they report that Georgia officials are strangely apathetic about fixing serious security flaws in the voting systems there. And Russians troll Vladimir Putin for once on the big screen Chiron during his annual Dear Leader live call-in show. My goodness.